it's me, Laurel Ann, and welcome to another video about books. This is my wrap-up of all the books I read in February and March. I did not mean to combine these months, but suddenly, without me quite realizing what had happened, it was April, and now it's mid-April. So, you know what? They got combined. I haven't filmed a video in seemingly months. I don't always do this, but I am going to be ranking these from ones I liked the least to the most. However, the first thing I'm going to talk about is separate from that ranking. The Lord of the Rings trilogy. I read them for the first time in my life. All three. They thick. They long. They slow sometimes. But ultimately, they good. I'm not really going to say that much about this because I vlogged my reactions to reading Lord of the Rings for the first time. So theoretically, there should be an entire video on these coming sometime. But just wanted to mention them here and say that, yes, hot take, Lord of the Rings is pretty good. It's pretty good. Now on to the ranked books. The first book, and thereby the book I liked the least, but still liked, was Public Library and Other Stories by Ali Smith. This is a short story collection, and like many of my favorite short stories, the ones in here lean pretty heavily on magical realism. A woman awakes one morning to find a rose bush growing from her chest. Another befriends Catherine Mansfield's ghost. But then these highly esoteric and fuzzy stories are punctuated by these kind of interstitials where a lot of other famous writers and also just friends of Ali Smith, I guess, talk about public libraries and what public libraries mean to them. Over 800 UK libraries have been closed since the Tories took power in 2010, and I think this is kind of Ali Smith's little act of protest against that. It's very clear that she believes libraries are a necessary and valuable service, which obviously they are. Stand libraries, folks. But then this collection ends up being about much more than just libraries. It's also about accessibility and transportation and accuracy and ethics in journalism. I can't say the words ethics in journalism without thinking of Gamergate, so excuse me while I wash my mouth out with soap. This is very good for what it is. I really enjoyed it while I was reading it. I love Ali Smith. Her writing is kind of just like a warm blanket to me. It's also kind of like candy for my brain, but like healthy candy, if that's a thing. Like maybe the little coca chews that you get in Peru when you're hiking and they're like, oh, this will help with the altitude sickness, but it doesn't really. It just kind of tastes like grass. But anyway, relatable content? Probably not. Ultimately though, very few of these stories stuck with me. That's kind of normal for short stories, but for that reason, it's going at the bottom of the pile for the February and March books. Next we have Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler. This is widely considered a modern classic of sci-fi. It is set in a not too distant future USA. I think it starts in 2025. And the climate crisis in combination with end-stage capitalism have married together to create the perfect dystopian conditions. But there's still the vestiges of society sort of clinging to some kind of sense of normalcy. And that is where we lay our scene as we follow a teenager named Lauren who is living in sort of a middle-class society that is kind of limping along until, as time progresses, everything just totally unravels. At the age of, I think 18 or 19, Lauren teams up with a couple of the survivors from her neighborhood and they start walking north to try and find somewhere where they can survive. This book is too real at this point to even be considered sci-fi. I have truly never seen such a likely dystopia. So that was like, it was interesting to read, but not exactly fun, you know, because it was just like, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if this is how I'm living in 5 years. But all that aside, I really enjoyed a lot about this story. The characters in particular, I appreciated that they were all people who were good people who believed in being merciful and generous, but they all had different backgrounds and different reasons for believing in those values. Now, what I didn't like about this book is that Lauren's whole kind of raison d'etre is this religion that she has thought up called Earthseed. And I don't know, I just didn't really care for it. All the parts where she's talking about Earthseed, I just kind of checked out. Didn't really do anything for me. There is a sequel to this book. I'm not sure if I'm going to read it because I feel like it will be even more rooted in the Earthseed stuff. Have any of you read it? Should I read it? Let me know, please, because I'm kind of on the fence about it. The Confessions of Frannie Langton by Sara Collins. This is historical fiction about Frannie, a woman who grew up enslaved on a plantation in Jamaica and was brought as an adult by her master to England and given to a colleague / rival of his to serve as a servant in his home. And this is after slavery was abolished in England, so she is technically free, but the book does a very interesting way of showing how, for a former enslaved person, that's not really the way it feels. This story is framed as her writing down her life story as she sits in prison, awaiting her trial as she has been accused of murdering both her master and his wife. This really attracted me from the moment I first heard about it because Alias Grace by Margaret Atwood is one of my favorite books of all time, and if you've read that book, you'll know that this is a very similar conceit. And this is a very strong book in a lot of ways. The different relationships Frannie has with the white people who exploit her are complex and unnerving. Both her master on the plantation in Jamaica and the man she comes to work for in England are sort of, race scientists. Basically, they're in the business of trying to prove, using science, that black people are a different species from white people, thereby justifying the slave trade. And that obviously is such a queasy topic, and I think it's explored really interestingly here, but it never quite came together for me. There are sort of 5 distinct parts of Frannie's life, and they never quite, they all felt a bit isolated from one another. Frannie is a very frustrating character because she's extremely intelligent and robust, and yet she never seems to learn anything about people or herself. This also uses the unreliable narrator, which is one of my favorite devices when done extremely well. And this one, it just felt like Frannie was holding back information and then later she just gave it to me. I feel that the similarities to Alias Grace actually kind of hold this novel back. It is a completely different story and totally enjoyable in its own right, but because I thought Alias Grace when I was going into it, I was sort of expecting the same oomph that I got when I read that, and it just didn't really happen. But all that being said, it's definitely a very strong debut, and I definitely want to keep up with Sara Collins' career. Next, we have another historical fiction, Once Upon a River by Diane Setterfield. I buddy read this with Morgan. I will link her channel below, and spoiler alert, we both enjoyed this. This is set in the 19th century in a village beside the Thames, and we open in a pub that is sort of locally known as being a place where people come and tell stories. And one very rainy, stormy night, everyone is in the pub having a pint, sharing a story, and this mysterious man barges in, battered and bloody, holding the body of a child who appears to be dead. They call the local midwife / medical practitioner who confirms that the child is not breathing and does not have a pulse. However, an hour later, seemingly miraculously, the child comes back to life. So, of course, there's this mystery. Who is this child? How did she come back from the dead? And she can't speak, so she cannot answer these questions herself. But there are 3 different local people who have reason to believe that she is connected to their families. This is not a slim boy. It's got a huge number of really quirky characters, all with their own subplots. I was never bored, and I was very pleased with the way everything came together in the end. I thought it was really clever. The tone is very true to this sort of folk tale, fairy tale vibe, but I thought it was also sort of modernized by the fact that while there are things that appear magical in this book, everything could also be explained by mundane explanations. I hate that I just used that word like that, but it's staying. I don't want to think of another word. And the writing is truly stunning. There are so many gorgeous descriptions of the river and the country life and the power of stories and storytelling. But there were a few things that just didn't really jive with me. It has a very sort of absolutist view of morality. You are born good or you are born bad. And if you're born bad, that's it. You're bad forever. I don't think that's true, and I don't think it's that interesting an angle to take for your villain. And then there was also this sort of like compulsory maternity thing that I really didn't like. I just really brush up against the idea that, you know, women who say they don't want a kid just need to meet the right guy, because shut up. But those are really small parts of the story that didn't hinder my overall enjoyment too much. And reading this just made me even more excited to read The 13th Tale, which pretty much across the board I've heard is a stronger book. So if this is her weaker novel, wow. Okay, so entering the top 3, we have You Should See Me in a Crown by Leah Johnson. This is about a high school senior in Indiana who decides to run for prom queen to try and win the scholarship that comes along with that title. In the process, she learns a lot about herself and her school and her community. This is so cute, and I smiled the whole time, but it does not sink into the saccharine. There was also this dimension that I thought was surprising and interesting, which is that Liz's mother died of sickle cell anemia, and now her brother has it as well. And that is something that I haven't seen represented, I don't think, in any media. So I was really happy to have the opportunity to learn more about that. And I also thought it added a nice level of depth to the story. Liz is gay, and she doesn't have any weird feelings about that, which is just nice to read, you know? It's nice. I really just felt like this book came to me at exactly the right moment. It was just what I needed at the time. I read it in like 24 hours. I will say the writing is a little bit corny. I definitely kind of side-eyed some of the pop culture references. There were some that I kind of doubt are relevant to teens today. And it was something that might have bothered me in a lesser novel, but it didn't here. It just works. It's just a nice story of people being supportive of one another, and you know, what else do we need? Next we have Queenie by Candice Carty-Williams. This is about Queenie, of course. A 25-year-old Jamaican-British woman living in London. And we meet up with her right at the start of what becomes a full-on mental health crisis after her long-term boyfriend tells her that they need to go on a break. Queenie responds to this profound shock and loss of control by sleeping with a lot of men, most of whom treat her terribly. This book honestly kind of surprised me by how deep it is. And I don't mean like #deep, but I mean in terms of how many themes and social issues it is really digging into and tackling. I think it tackles racism in a way I haven't really seen done, at least not that I can recall. There are microaggressions that happen in this book that don't even seem to register as racist incidents to Queenie. And I think that that did a brilliant job of sort of communicating to the reader how often she has to deal with this stuff, to the point where it doesn't even click. She doesn't even pick up on it because it is so old hat. It is so commonplace. It happens to her every day. But that's just one tiny slice of what this novel is doing. It is harrowing. I heard somebody say that it was a tough read, but then you pick up the book and the blurbs on the back say, brazenly hilarious. Tell it like it is. I'm sorry. If you read this book and came away saying, that was brazenly hilarious, I don't know what's wrong with you. And I remember when this book first came out, I heard it described on more than one occasion as the Black Bridget Jones. And now having read this, I find that strange, because I think that Bridget Jones and other stories of her ilk are exactly the types of stories that Candice Carty-Williams is trying to comment on. For example, the things that Bridget Jones is able to get away with at work that Queenie absolutely cannot. And the way that sort of shines a light on white privilege without something even being on the novel, in this novel, you know, just having that sort of point of comparison. And also, I think it brings to mind things that were acceptable 20 years ago that absolutely are not now. But yeah, I just was really impressed by this book. It kind of snuck up on me and how clever it is. Now, having said that the book is not funny, Queenie is funny. She's a funny character. She has clever dialogue, very sort of irreverent internal monologue, and she also has this group of friends that is just a delight. I definitely don't think this is a book for everyone because it is very difficult to read. It gave me a nightmare, which who would have thought that I would get a nightmare from reading Queenie? But I did. So yeah, just be careful going into it, but I would recommend this one. Also, I think this is one of my favorite covers of the last couple of years. I just think it's dope. And then the last book I have to talk about today, and my favorite book that I read in February and March combined, is Why Fish Don't Exist by Lulu Miller. This one is a little bit hard to classify. It's sort of part memoir, part literary biography. This is about how Lulu Miller, who you may know from podcasts Invisibilia and Radiolab, kind of threw herself into researching this taxonomist named David Starr Jordan in the midst of basically what she felt was the complete unraveling of her own life. She says that she initially found herself attracted to Starr Jordan because of his fortitude and tenacity in the face of chaos, and that she admired those qualities because she felt that they were ones that she lacked. And she sort of thought that those holes in her personality were responsible for many of the problems she was facing in her life at the time. And in the early days of her research, he really comes to be a role model, a guiding light, until the deeper she digs, the more disturbing things she discovers about him. This book has so many threads that all come together in the most chef's kissiest way possible. The level of craft on display here is top-notch. It's pretty short, but it manages to say so much about mental health and the value of life, legacy, and the proverbial whitewashing of the historical white men's image. And most importantly and most profoundly, it explores love in a beautiful way. I really think that this is going to turn out to be one of my very favorites of 2021. It's an extremely rewarding read, and I really hope that I can convince some of you to pick it up because it's special, okay? And that's all. Thanks for still being here even after my absence, my accidental hiatus. I hope you are all well. If you made it to the end and want to give me some engagement points but don't have anything to say, leave a little fish emoji in the comments below. Bye! Next we have Octavia of the Sower. Honestly, why do I keep saying honestly? Stop it.